I was standing in my own apartment when I received the text that would change everything. The message was from Officer Grant, Portland Police Department. There was yellow crime scene tape across my door, patrol cars flashing outside, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Just 3 hours earlier, I had been at my own birthday dinner, smiling through gritted teeth as my mother whispered instructions to my brother to change the locks on my apartment without my permission. Now the police were telling me someone had broken into my home, and somehow I knew with absolute certainty that my family was behind it. What I didn't know yet was that this single night would unravel 29 years of lies, expose a criminal conspiracy that had used my identity as a shield, and force me to choose between the family that had raised me and the life I deserved to live. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're enjoying this journey of standing up against toxic family dynamics, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of courage and transformation, and drop a comment below, sharing your own experiences with setting boundaries. Your support means everything and helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Now let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months before that terrifying night, I was living what most people would call a normal life, though looking back now I can see how carefully I had constructed that illusion. I was 29 years old, working as a marketing coordinator at a small tech firm in Portland, Oregon, and raising my 5-year-old son Liam on my own. My apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, but it was ours. The walls were covered with Liam's artwork, crayon drawings of dinosaurs and spaceships that he would present to me with such pride that I couldn't help but tape every single one up. In the mornings, I would wake up to the sound of him talking to his stuffed animals, creating elaborate stories about their adventures. Those moments felt like the only pure thing in my life, the only space where I didn't have to perform or pretend or meet someone else's impossible standards. My apartment building was one of those old brick structures that Portland is known for, built sometime in the 1930s with high ceilings and creaky floors that announced every footstep. The landlord was a man in his 70s named Mr. Chen, who had owned the building for 40 years and knew every tenant by name. His nephew Thomas did the maintenance work, a quiet guy in his early 20s who always seemed to be lurking in the hallways with a toolbox fixing things that didn't seem broken. I never thought much about Thomas back then. He was just part of the background noise of daily life, like the hiss of the radiator in winter or the sound of traffic from the street below. My relationship with my family had always been complicated, though I didn't have the language to describe it back then. I had grown up thinking that all families operated the way mine did, with unspoken rules and invisible tripwires that you learned to navigate through painful trial and error. My mother, Eleanor, was a force of nature, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately began rearranging it to suit her vision. She had opinions about everything I did, from the way I dressed, to the way I raised Liam, to the career choices I made. But it wasn't just opinions. It was a constant grinding pressure, like being slowly crushed under the weight of her expectations. She would call me 3 or 4 times a day, sometimes more. The conversations always followed the same pattern. She would ask how I was doing, and before I could finish answering, she would interrupt with a story about something Nathan had accomplished or a criticism disguised as concern. Have you thought about losing some weight, Lauren? You know, men don't like women who let themselves go. Are you really going to let Liam watch that much television? Studies show it damages their development. Why are you still working at that startup? You know those companies never last. Wouldn't you rather have stability? The words would pile up layer after layer until I felt like I was suffocating. And the worst part was that she delivered every criticism with this veneer of motherly love, this implication that she was only saying these things because she cared so much, because she wanted the best for me. How could I be angry at someone who claimed to have my best interests at heart? How could I push back against someone who framed every controlling behavior as protection? My father, Richard, was quieter, always deferring to my mother's judgment, nodding along to her pronouncements like a court official affirming royal decrees. In public, he presented himself as a successful real estate developer, always talking about his latest investment property or market trends. But at home, he became this shadow of a man, speaking only when spoken to, following Eleanor's lead in everything. I used to wonder if he had always been like that, or if years of marriage to my mother had worn him down into submission. Either way, he had perfected the art of passive complicity, enabling her behavior through his silence. And then there was my brother Nathan, 2 years older than me, who had somehow mastered the art of being exactly what our parents wanted him to be. He worked in the family real estate business, driving a BMW that our parents had bought him, living in a condo downtown that they had helped him purchase. His wife Sarah was a soft-spoken woman who seemed perpetually exhausted, though I could never figure out if that was from working as a nurse on 12-hour shifts or from the effort of maintaining the facade of a perfect marriage. At family gatherings, Sarah would give me these looks across the table, these brief moments of connection that said she understood, but she never spoke up. Nobody ever spoke up. Growing up, I had learned that keeping the peace meant swallowing my own needs, shrinking myself down to a size that wouldn't threaten my mother's sense of control. When I was 16 and wanted to try out for the debate team, my mother told me it would take time away from the family and that I should focus on activities that would make me more marriageable. The word marriageable hung in the air like a noose. I dropped the idea and spent my afternoons volunteering at the church's bake sales, instead activities that met with Eleanor's approval. When I was 18 and got accepted to Reed College, one of the most prestigious liberal arts schools in the country with a full scholarship, my mother cried for 3 days straight. She told everyone who would listen that I was abandoning the family, that I was being selfish, that I clearly didn't care about them at all. She made me feel like I was committing a crime by wanting to leave Portland, wanting to study literature and philosophy, wanting to be someone other than who she had decided I should be. The guilt was overwhelming. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I watched my mother move through the house like a ghost, sighing dramatically every time she saw me, and eventually I cracked. I turned down Reed and enrolled at Portland State University instead, living at home to save money, commuting to classes while my mother tracked my every movement. When I got pregnant with Liam at 23, unmarried and terrified, she made it clear that I had disappointed them all, but that they would graciously allow me to stay in their lives if I followed their rules. The father was a guy I had been dating for about 6 months, someone I thought I might love until he made it clear that he had no intention of being a father and disappeared the day I told him about the pregnancy. I was working as a barista at the time, barely making rent, and the idea of raising a child alone felt impossible. But abortion wasn't an option my mother would consider, and adoption, she said, would bring shame on the family. So I kept the baby, and my mother held that decision over my head for the next 5 years. The rules were never explicitly stated, but I learned them through trial and error, through the cold silences and passive-aggressive comments that followed any transgression. I was supposed to be grateful for any help they offered, even when that help came with strings attached that threatened to strangle me. I was supposed to attend every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every impromptu Sunday brunch, regardless of my own schedule or Liam's needs. I was supposed to accept my mother's criticism as concern and my father's silence as wisdom. I was supposed to pretend that Nathan's success in the family real estate business was something to celebrate, even though I knew that success had been handed to him on a silver platter while I struggled to pay for groceries and daycare. The financial entanglement started small, or at least that's how it appeared at the time. 3 years before that birthday dinner, I had hit a rough patch that would have broken someone with less determination. Liam needed surgery for an inguinal hernia that had been causing him pain for months. The pediatrician had initially said we could monitor it, but then Liam started complaining that it hurt when he ran, when he played, when he did anything more than sit still. The surgery was classified as necessary but not emergency, which meant my insurance barely covered half the cost. I was working 2 jobs at the time, my marketing coordinator position during the day and weekend shifts at a bookstore in the evenings, barely sleeping, and the medical bills were piling up faster than I could pay them down. I remember the night I finally broke down and called my mother. It was 2 a.m. and I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by bills, a calculator, and a notepad where I had been trying to figure out if there was any possible way to make the numbers work. There wasn't. I had already cut every expense I could think of. I was buying the cheapest groceries, skipping meals so Liam could eat properly, wearing clothes with holes in them because I couldn't afford to replace them. And still it wasn't enough. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep, but alert in that way mothers are when their children call in the middle of the night. "Lauren, what's wrong?" I tried to explain about Liam's surgery, about the bills, about how I had exhausted every other option. My voice cracked halfway through and I started crying, these ugly, desperate sobs that I couldn't control. I felt like such a failure, like I had proven every criticism she had ever made about my inability to manage my life. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said in a voice that was almost kind, almost maternal, "Of course we'll help you, sweetheart. That's what family is for. Come by the house tomorrow and we'll work something out." The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I thanked her over and over, told her I would pay her back as soon as I could promise that this was just temporary. She made soothing sounds and told me not to worry, that we would figure it out together. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I had been wrong about her. Maybe underneath all the criticism and control, she really did love me. The next day, I went to my parents' house, a sprawling craftsman in the West Hills with a view of Mount Hood on clear days. My mother sat me down at the dining room table with a stack of papers and a pen. She explained that she would co-sign a personal loan for me enough to cover Liam's surgery and the immediate bills. It seemed generous at the time. It seemed like the lifeline I desperately needed. I signed where she told me to sign, barely reading the fine print because I was so exhausted and so grateful. What I didn't realize was that she had also opened several credit cards in my name using my social security number and forging my signature on the applications. The bills went to my parents' address, something about keeping better track of the finances and making sure I didn't miss any payments, my mother said. I was too overwhelmed with work and single parenthood to question it. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. By the time I discovered what was happening a year later when I applied for a car loan and was rejected due to my credit score, I was already in too deep. The loan officer had looked at me with barely concealed pity and printed out a credit report that showed thousands of dollars in debt I hadn't known existed. Credit cards from stores I had never shopped at, accounts opened in cities I had never visited, payment histories that showed consistent late fees and accumulating interest. I sat in that loan office staring at the papers, feeling like the floor had opened up beneath me. I confronted my mother that same day, driving directly from the bank to her house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. She was in the garden when I arrived, pruning her rose bushes with surgical precision, wearing gardening gloves that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I walked up to her and thrust the credit report in her face, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "What is this? What did you do?" She barely glanced at the papers, just continued pruning her roses with that infuriating calm. "Oh, Lauren," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "those credit cards are for your own good. I'm building your credit history. You were too irresponsible to manage money on your own, so I took care of it for you. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I felt like I was losing my mind. "You forged my signature. You opened accounts without my permission. This is fraud." She set down her pruning shears and looked at me with such cold disappointment that I felt like I was 10 years old again, standing in the principal's office being scolded for something I didn't do. "Don't be dramatic, Lauren. Everything I did was to help you. Do you remember how desperate you were when Liam needed surgery? Do you remember calling me in the middle of the night crying because you couldn't take care of your own child?" The words hit like physical blows. She was right, and that was the most painful part. I had been desperate. I had needed help. And she had weaponized that vulnerability, turned my moment of need into a justification for taking over my entire financial life. She continued, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she wanted to make me feel small. "Look at your history, Lauren. The overdraft fees, the late payments, the maxed out store cards before I stepped in. You can't manage money. You never could. So I managed it for you. And instead of being grateful, you come here and accuse me of fraud. After everything I've done for you," I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that the overdraft fees happened because I was choosing between paying bills and buying food for my child, that the late payments were because I was working 70 hours a week and sometimes things slipped through the cracks, that none of it justified what she had done. But the words died in my throat because some part of me, some deeply programmed part that had been taught since childhood that mothers are always right, believed her. Maybe I was irresponsible. Maybe I couldn't be trusted. Maybe this was my fault. She must have seen the doubt in my eyes because her expression softened, became almost tender. "I'm your mother, Lauren. Everything I do is because I love you. You'll understand that someday when Liam is older. Sometimes love means making hard choices, protecting people from their own mistakes." Then she said the words that would echo in my head for years to come, the words that would keep me silent even as the debt continued to grow. "If you make a fuss about this, if you try to report it or cause problems, you will destroy this family. Is that what you want? To be the one who tears us apart? To be the daughter who betrayed her own mother?" I didn't report it. I couldn't bear the thought of being the villain in their story, of being the daughter who betrayed her own mother. So I kept quiet and the debt kept growing. Every few months there would be another statement, another charge. I didn't recognize another payment I was somehow responsible for. My mother would wave it away, telling me it was investments in my future, that I would thank her someday when I understood how the world really worked. But the financial manipulation was only part of the story. There was also the constant emotional erosion, the way my mother could make me feel guilty for having boundaries or needs of my own. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to dismiss individually but devastating in their cumulative effect. When Liam started kindergarten, I wanted to enroll him in an arts program on Saturday mornings at the community center. He loved to paint and draw, would spend hours at the kitchen table creating elaborate scenes with his cheap watercolors and construction paper. The program was taught by a local artist and only cost $30 a month, but I was so excited to give him this opportunity, this chance to develop his talents. I told my mother about it during one of our daily phone calls, expecting her to be pleased that I was investing in Liam's education. Instead, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said in that particular tone that always made my stomach drop, "Saturday mornings are for family time, Lauren. You know that. We always have brunch together on Saturdays. Are you saying Liam's hobbies are more important than his family?" I tried to explain that the program was only for 2 hours, that we could still make it to brunch afterward, but she talked over me. "You're being selfish, Lauren. You're putting your own desires ahead of what's best for Liam. Children need stability, routine family connections. They don't need to be shuffled around to different activities so their mothers can feel like they're doing something special. And honestly, do you really think Liam is talented enough at art to justify the expense and disruption?" The last question cut the deepest because it planted a seed of doubt. Was I overestimating my son's abilities? Was I projecting my own unfulfilled dreams onto him? Was I being selfish by wanting to give him opportunities I had never had? By the time I hung up the phone, I had convinced myself that enrolling Liam in the art program would be a mistake. I canceled the registration and spent every Saturday morning at my parents' house, instead watching Liam color quietly at the kitchen table with cheap crayons, while my mother and Nathan discussed real estate deals and property values. Liam never complained, but sometimes I would catch him staring out the window with this distant look in his eyes, and I wondered what he was thinking about. What dreams was I training him to suppress? What parts of himself was I teaching him to hide in order to keep the peace? I told myself I was being a good daughter. I told myself that family was important, that I should be grateful for their presence in my life, that other people had it worse. I read articles about toxic families and always found a reason why those articles didn't apply to mine. My mother wasn't physically abusive after all. She didn't scream or throw things. She just had strong opinions. She just wanted what was best for me. I repeated these justifications, like a mantra, trying to convince myself that the tightness in my chest every time I saw her number on my phone was normal, that the way I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her was just part of being an adult in a complicated family. The warning signs were there, scattered throughout the years like breadcrumbs I was too afraid to follow. There was the time about 2 years ago when I found a bank statement in my mail that showed a savings account I didn't remember opening. The account was in my name and had regular deposits that didn't match any income I was aware of. The deposits came twice a month, always exactly $750, and they had been going on for over a year. When I added it up, there was over $18,000 in this account I hadn't known existed. I called the bank first, thinking maybe there had been some kind of error, but they confirmed that the account was legitimate, that it had been opened with my social security number and a valid form of identification. They couldn't tell me who had opened it without proper authorization, but they could confirm that the deposits were coming from something called Reeves Holdings LLC, a company I had never heard of. I confronted my mother about it the next day. She looked at me like I was being absurdly ungrateful. "That's a trust fund I set up for Liam's education," she said, with exaggerated patience. "I'm putting money aside for his future, and you're interrogating me about it like I'm some kind of criminal. Most children would be thankful to have a grandmother who cares so much about her grandson's future." I asked why she hadn't told me about it, why my name was on the account instead of Liam's, why the deposits were coming from a company I had never heard of. She waved away each question with increasing irritation. "You don't need to understand every detail of how I manage family finances, Lauren. The account is in your name because you're his mother. The company is just a tax structure your father set up for his business. This is exactly why I handle these things, because you get confused and suspicious over perfectly normal financial planning." I wanted to push harder, wanted to demand real answers, but she had already turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. And once again, I let it drop, convincing myself that maybe she was right, maybe I was being paranoid, maybe this was just how wealthy families manage their money. Then there was the afternoon, maybe 8 months ago, when I ran into one of my father's old business associates at the grocery store. His name was Adam something, and I vaguely remembered him from company parties when I was a teenager. He was in his 60s now, retired, and he looked genuinely pleased to see me. We chatted for a few minutes about nothing in particular, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Tell your father," I said, "congratulations on the Nassau arrangement. That was some brilliant structuring. Not many people could have pulled off that kind of offshore setup so cleanly." He said it casually, like he was complimenting my father on a good golf game, but I must have looked confused because he gave me a knowing look and patted my arm. You probably know more about it than I do, considering your name is on the documents. Your father always was smart about including family members in his business structures. I had no idea what he was talking about. Nassau, as in the Bahamas. Offshore accounts. My name on what documents? But before I could ask any questions, Adam's wife called him from across the store, and he hurried off, leaving me standing in the produce section with a cart full of groceries and a head full of questions I didn't know how to answer. I thought about bringing it up with my father, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Adam had said it, with that conspiratorial tone that suggested I was supposed to already know. Maybe it was the growing realization that there were things happening with my identity, my name, my legal personhood that I had no knowledge of. Or maybe it was just fear, because asking the question would mean acknowledging that something was very wrong and I wasn't ready to face that truth yet. The warning signs kept accumulating. There was the evening my brother Nathan got drunk at a family barbecue and muttered something about how I was the perfect alibi, how nobody would ever suspect me because I was too naive to be part of anything shady. When I asked him what he meant, he just laughed it off and stumbled away to get another beer. There was the time I overheard my mother on the phone with someone speaking in a low, urgent voice about moving assets and the importance of keeping certain accounts separate, and when she noticed me standing in the doorway, she changed her tone completely and started talking about gardening. I brushed all of it aside. I was good at brushing things aside. It was a survival skill I had honed over decades of being told that my perceptions were wrong, that my feelings were overreactions, that I was too sensitive or too paranoid or too ungrateful. I had learned to ignore the voice in my head that said something wasn't right, that said I was being used, that said I deserved better. That voice got quieter every year, easier to dismiss, until sometimes I could go days without hearing it at all. And then came my 29th birthday, and everything changed. My mother insisted on throwing a dinner party at an upscale restaurant downtown Castagna, the kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who described each dish like they were presenting art at a gallery. I didn't want a party. I never wanted parties, especially not ones orchestrated by my mother where I would be the center of attention while simultaneously feeling invisible. I wanted a quiet evening at home with Liam, maybe ordering pizza from his favorite place and watching his favorite cartoon movie for the 100th time. But my mother said that was ridiculous, that I needed to celebrate properly, that she had already made the reservation and invited Nathan and his wife Sarah and my father's business partner and his wife. So I put on the dress my mother had bought me the previous Christmas, a navy blue sheath dress that was one size too small and cut in a style that might have looked elegant on someone else, but just made me feel constrained and uncomfortable. I spent 20 minutes trying to zip it up, eventually succeeding, but feeling like I couldn't breathe properly. I did my makeup the way my mother liked it, with more foundation than I would normally wear and lipstick in a shade of red that felt too bold for my personality. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who looked like me but wasn't quite me, like a slightly off portrait painted by someone who didn't know me very well. I picked up Liam from daycare and drove him to my parents' house where he would spend the evening with a babysitter. He was excited about the babysitter, a college student named Megan, who always brought new coloring books and let him stay up past his bedtime. As I kissed him goodbye, he grabbed my face with both hands and said, "Mommy, you look like a princess." The sweetness of it almost made me cry, this pure, uncomplicated love from the only person in my life who never made me feel like I wasn't enough. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes late because of traffic, and my mother's expression when I walked in made it clear that this was already being counted as a failure. She was sitting at a round table near the window, my father to her right, Nathan and Sarah across from them, and two empty chairs that were presumably for me and a date I didn't have. The table was set with elaborate flower arrangements and multiple wine glasses per person, the kind of ostentatious display that my mother loved and that always made me feel uncomfortable. "I'm sorry I'm late," I said as I slid into my chair. Traffic on the bridge was terrible. My mother's smile was tight. "We were about to order without you." The dinner was tense from the start, though. To an outside observer, it probably would have looked like a pleasant family gathering. My mother kept making comments about my weight disguised as concern for my health. "Lauren, you should try the arugula salad. It's much lighter than the pasta. You know, you really do need to think about portion control." She said it with a smile, with love in her voice, but Sarah caught my eye across the table, and I saw sympathy there, recognition of the small cruelties that were invisible to everyone else. My father sat at his end of the table, cutting his filet mignon into precise squares, contributing nothing to the conversation, except occasional nods when my mother said something that required validation. Nathan was on his phone for most of the meal, occasionally glancing up to agree with whatever our mother was saying. The business partner, whose name I can't even remember now, droned on about property values and market forecasts, and everyone nodded politely as if any of us cared. I was pushing food around my plate, barely eating because the dress was so tight I could hardly breathe when my mother stood up and tapped her wine glass with a knife. She had decided apparently that we needed speeches. She gave a lengthy toast about family and sacrifice and how proud she was of both her children, though most of the pride seemed directed at Nathan's recent promotion in the family business. Then she gestured to me, indicating it was my turn to say something. I stood up feeling dizzy from the wine I had been drinking too fast, and the constriction of the dress and the weight of everyone's attention. I started to speak, trying to thank them for coming, trying to inject some warmth and authenticity into this performance we were all engaged in. I was maybe 3 sentences in talking about how grateful I was for family when I heard it. My mother leaning toward my father, her voice low but not quite low enough. "Richard, when Nathan gets back, tell him to go change the locks on her apartment. Don't let her have time to react." I have always had good hearing, unnaturally good, hearing the kind that picks up conversations across crowded rooms and whispers behind closed doors. It was a skill born from years of needing to know what my family was saying about me when they thought I wasn't listening, years of monitoring tone and mood to navigate the emotional minefield of my childhood. So I heard every word clear as a bell, even over the ambient noise of the restaurant, even while I was still speaking. And I felt something crack inside my chest, like a bone breaking, like the last thin thread of trust finally snapping. I kept smiling. I kept talking. My voice didn't waver. But inside, my mind was racing, replaying those words over and over. Change the locks on her apartment. Don't let her have time to react. What did that mean? What were they trying to keep me from? Or what were they trying to get to? The implications spiraled out in every direction, each possibility worse than the last. I finished my speech somehow, though I have no memory of what I said. People clapped politely. I sat down and watched as my mother touched Nathan's arm and whispered something to him. He nodded, excused himself from the table, and walked out of the restaurant without even glancing in my direction. I watched him go through the large windows, saw him answer a phone call as he got into his BMW, saw him drive away. The sound of his departure felt like a countdown timer starting, though I didn't know what it was counting down to. I sat through the rest of the dinner in a fog, my mind racing while my body went through the motions. We cut the birthday cake that I hadn't wanted, with everyone singing a half-hearted rendition of Happy Birthday. The cake was red velvet with cream cheese frosting, which wasn't even my favorite but was my mother's, because of course the cake at my birthday party would be chosen to suit her preferences. I took a single bite that tasted like cardboard in my mouth and pushed the plate away. An hour and 15 minutes after Nathan left, he returned. I had been counting the minutes, watching the clock on my phone, wondering what could possibly take that long. When he walked back into the restaurant, his face was pale, almost gray, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. He looked like someone who had just witnessed an accident or caused one. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his chair, and when my mother immediately demanded to know if he had finished the job, the entire table fell silent. "Mom," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's crime scene tape on Lauren's door." The sound of my father's fork hitting his plate was like a gunshot. My mother's face went rigid, all the careful composure draining away to reveal something underneath that looked like fear. Nathan was shaking his head, his words coming faster, now tumbling over each other. "I'm not joking. There's a police officer standing right outside her apartment. He told me there was an incident and nobody is allowed in. He said there's an active investigation." "What kind of incident?" my mother asked, and her voice had gone sharp, all pretense of maternal warmth abandoned. "I don't know," he said. "He wouldn't tell me. But there was crime scene tape, Mom. Yellow tape across the whole door. And the officer was asking who I was and why I was trying to access the apartment. I told him I was Lauren's brother and that our mother had asked me to check on something, and he told me nobody enters until the investigation is complete." I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body, like I was floating somewhere near the ceiling, looking down at this family I no longer recognized. Everything was happening in slow motion and too fast all at once. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out with numb fingers. A text from an unknown number. "Lauren Reeves, this is Officer Grant from the Portland Police Department. Please contact us immediately regarding your apartment. There has been an incident that requires your attention." I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a scream. Everyone turned to look at me, and I saw my mother's expression shift from fear to calculation in the span of a heartbeat. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to try to control the narrative to explain this away, but I cut her off. I need to go, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. The police are asking me to come to my apartment. Lauren, wait, my mother said, reaching for my arm, but I stepped back out of her reach. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw her for what she was. Not a concerned mother worried about her daughter's safety. Not a protective parent trying to help. Just a woman who was terrified that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse, and who was already calculating how to shift the blame, how to control the damage, how to make this my fault somehow. I'll call you later, I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. Then I turned and walked out of that restaurant, leaving behind the cake and the presents I hadn't opened, and the family who had never really been mine. The drive to my apartment felt both endless and instantaneous, my mind spinning with possibilities, none of them good. The streets of Portland blurred past my windows, familiar landmarks rendered strange and threatening under the streetlights. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head. Change the locks. Don't let her have time to react. React to what? What had they been planning? What had gone wrong? When I pulled up to my building, the scene was worse than I had imagined. 2 patrol cars were parked outside their lights, casting blue and red shadows across the brick facade that made the whole building look like it was on fire. There was yellow tape stretched across my door, the kind you see on crime shows, and a uniformed officer stood in the 3rd-floor hallway speaking into his radio. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk below, craning their necks to see what was happening, whispering to each other with that mix of concern and excitement that people get when something dramatic happens to someone else. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. This was real. This was actually happening. Whatever I had been afraid to see, whatever truth I had been avoiding, I was about to come face to face with it. Officer Grant was waiting for me in the lobby. He was in his early 40s with graying haircut, military short, and eyes that had the particular weariness of someone who had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. He approached me as I entered, his expression serious but not unkind, and I felt an absurd urge to apologize, though I had no idea what I was apologizing for. "Miss Reeves?" he asked, though he clearly already knew who I was. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt like it had closed up. "I'm Officer Grant. Thank you for coming so quickly." He gestured toward the elevator. "Why don't we go up and I can show you what we're dealing with?" We rode up to the 3rd floor in silence. The elevator was old and slow, and I counted every second, 23 of them, while trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. When the doors opened, I could see my apartment door from the elevator, the yellow tape stretched across it like a scar, and I felt my knees go weak. "Can you tell me what happened?" I managed to ask. Grant led me down the hallway, stopping a few feet from my door. "There was a report of a break-in earlier this evening. A neighbor heard noises and called it in. When we arrived, we found your door had been forced open. The lock was damaged, but not in a way consistent with typical forced entry. It looked like someone had tried to pick it first, then gave up and just broke it." "Who?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "That's what we're trying to determine. The scene inside is unusual. Nothing appears to have been stolen. Electronics are still here, jewelry box untouched, no signs of ransacking. But there are some disturbing elements that suggest this wasn't a random burglary." He paused, studying my face. "Do you know anyone who might have had a reason to access your apartment? Anyone with a spare key or knowledge of your schedule?" I thought about Nathan racing away from the restaurant, about my mother's whispered instructions, about the years of financial manipulation and control. The truth was right there on the tip of my tongue, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. Once I accused my family of this, once I gave voice to what I suspected, there would be no going back to pretending everything was fine. "My brother," I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected. "Nathan Reeves. My mother told him to come here tonight to change my locks. I overheard her give him the instruction at my birthday dinner. He left the restaurant about an hour and a half before I got your text." Grant's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professional. "Why would your mother instruct your brother to change your locks without your permission?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the truth. "But I think she was trying to access something. Or prevent me from accessing something. I think there's something in my apartment she doesn't want me to find." His radio crackled with static, and I heard a voice report that the forensics team had finished processing the scene and had found multiple sets of fingerprints. Grant listened for a moment, then looked back at me. "Miss Reeves, I think you should sit down." We sat on the floor of the hallway, our backs against the wall opposite my door. It was surreal sitting on the industrial carpet in my too tight dress with a police officer discussing my life like it was a crime scene. Which I suppose it was. Grant pulled out a tablet and showed me several photographs of my apartment. From what I could see, he was right. Nothing obvious had been stolen. My laptop was still on the coffee table where I had left it that morning. Liam's Nintendo Switch was still plugged in by the TV. But there was something deeply wrong about the images. All of the photographs on my walls and shelves, every picture of me and Liam had been turned face down or removed from their frames. The image of our smiling faces deliberately hidden like someone couldn't stand to look at us. On my coffee table, centered carefully among the scattered mail and magazines, was a white envelope. Grant zoomed in on the image. "We haven't opened it yet. We wanted you present when we did. But there's something else you should know." He swiped to another screen showing what looked like a bank transfer record. "We ran a preliminary check on similar break-ins in this building. Your maintenance man, Thomas Hale, has been suspected in 3 other incidents over the past 6 months. Small thefts, usually cash or jewelry, nothing major. We brought him in for questioning tonight based on a tip from your landlord. Did he do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be more complicated than yes or no. "Thomas admitted to entering your apartment tonight, but he claims he was hired to do so. He says someone paid him $5,000 to gain access to your apartment and deliver that envelope. He was supposed to make it look like a break-in, but he was explicitly told not to take anything. Just deliver the message and leave." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Who paid him?" Grant hesitated, and in that hesitation I knew. "He says a woman hired him through an encrypted messaging app. She paid him in cash left in a drop location in a park. He never met her face to face. But Miss Reeves, we traced the phone number used to set up the payment. It's registered to your mother, Eleanor Reeves." The hallway tilted. I gripped the wall behind me to keep from falling over. My mother. My mother had hired someone to break into my apartment. The woman who was supposed to protect me, who claimed every controlling behavior was motivated by love, had literally sent a criminal into my home. "I need to see inside," I said. "I need to see what's in that envelope." Grant studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but don't touch anything yet. This is still an active crime scene." He led me through my door, and stepping into my own apartment felt like entering a parallel universe. Everything was familiar but wrong, like one of those spot-the-difference games where you know something has changed but you can't quite identify what. The turned photographs stared at me with their blank backs accusatory in their facelessness. My home, which had always been my sanctuary, the one place where Liam and I were safe and free, had been violated. The envelope sat on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to go off. It was standard white business-sized, unsealed. Grant pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully opened it, tilting it so I could see the contents without touching. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, printed in a generic computer font, were 2 sentences. "Tell your mother the truth. The truth always finds its way home." I stared at those words until they stopped making sense, just abstract shapes on paper. Tell your mother the truth. But what truth? And why would someone break into my apartment to deliver this message? Unless it wasn't meant for me at all. Unless this was a message to my mother delivered through me, a warning or a threat from someone who knew what she had been doing. "Miss Reeves," Grant said gently, "I need to ask you some difficult questions. Have you noticed any unusual financial activity recently? Any accounts you didn't open, any charges you didn't make?" The question opened a floodgate. I told him everything. About the credit cards opened in my name, about the mysterious savings account with deposits from Reeves Holdings LLC, about the conversation with my father's colleague, about offshore accounts in Nassau, about my mother's absolute control over my financial life. The words poured out of me, years of suspicion and fear and confusion finally finding voice. Grant listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on his tablet, his expression growing graver with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Miss Reeves, I think you need to know that we've been investigating your family's financial activities for several months now. We received an anonymous tip about potential tax fraud and identity theft. This break-in tonight, it might be related to that investigation. Someone might be trying to warn your mother that the truth is coming out or trying to push you to come forward." The room spun. On investigation. For months. While I had been going to family dinners and convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting, maybe this was normal, the police had been building a case. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, Grant said you need to decide if you want to press charges against your mother for hiring Thomas to break in. and you need to decide if you want to file a report about the identity theft and financial fraud. Once you do that, there's no going back. The investigation will become official, and your family will know you were the one who came forward. I sat down on my couch, careful not to disturb anything, and I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Press charges. File a report. Destroy my family. Become the villain in their story, the ungrateful daughter who betrayed her own mother. But as I looked around my violated apartment at the photographs turned away at the message that wasn't really meant for me, I realized something. I had already lost my family. The family I thought I had, the family I had been trying so desperately to preserve that family had never existed. It had been a fiction, a performance, a carefully maintained illusion. And I was done performing. Not yet, I said finally. I want to talk to my mother first. I want to hear her explain this. I want to look her in the eye and ask her how she could do this to me. Grant nodded slowly. That's your choice. But Miss Reeves, if you do confront her, I strongly advise you to record the conversation. Anything she admits to could be important evidence. And be careful. People who are capable of this kind of manipulation can be dangerous when they feel cornered. I left my apartment that night without taking anything, not even a change of clothes. Grant gave me his card and told me I could come back tomorrow once they had finished processing the scene. I drove to Eva's house in a daze, called her from the driveway, because I couldn't bring myself to knock on the door at midnight, and she appeared 2 minutes later in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. We sat in her kitchen until 4 in the morning. I told her everything that had happened, showed her the photographs Grant had taken, read her the message from the envelope. She listened with the careful attention of someone trained to analyze evidence, her lawyer mind already sorting through the implications. When I finished, she didn't say I told you so, even though she had been telling me for years that my family was toxic. She just said, Lauren, you need to document everything from this point forward. Every phone call, every conversation, every interaction. If you're going to confront your mother, you need to protect yourself. She helped me set up a recording app on my phone that would capture audio without being obvious. She coached me on what questions to ask, how to get my mother to incriminate herself without being so direct that she would become suspicious. And then she said something that cut through all my lingering doubt and guilt. Lauren, you didn't do this to them. They did this to you. Whatever happens now, that's on them. You're just trying to survive. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I lay on Eva's guest bed, watching the numbers on the clock, change my mind, replaying every interaction with my family, every warning sign I had dismissed, every moment when I had chosen to believe their version of reality over my own. Instincts. I thought about Liam still safe at my parents' house, with the babysitter blissfully unaware that his mother's life was imploding. I would need to go get him in the morning before I confronted my mother. I wouldn't let him be anywhere near that house when this all came crashing down. The next morning arrived, gray and drizzly, typical Portland October weather. I picked up Liam at 8, making up some excuse to the babysitter about a change of plans. Liam was chatty and happy, telling me all about the movies he had watched and the popcorn they had made, and I smiled and nodded while my heart broke for the innocence he still had the childhood. I was determined to protect, even as my own was being retroactively destroyed. I dropped Liam at Eva's, where she had arranged for her younger sister to babysit for the day. Then I sat in my car outside my parents' house, the house where I had grown up, where I had learned to make myself small and quiet and agreeable, and I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Lauren, where have you been? I've been calling you all night. What happened at your apartment? Is everything all right? Her voice was perfect, concerned, maternal, just the right amount of worry. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed she genuinely cared. We need to talk, I said. I'm outside. Let me in. A pause. Then, of course, darling. I'll put on some coffee. She met me at the door wearing what I privately thought of as her armor, a cream-colored cashmere sweater and tailored pants. Her hair styled, her makeup subtle and perfect. She looked like she was about to host a garden party, not face accusations of hiring someone to break into her daughter's apartment. She kissed my cheek, and I had to suppress the urge to flinch away. Come in, she said, ushering me into the living room. Your father is at the office. Nathan had to deal with some property inspection, so it's just us. Now tell me what on earth happened last night. I sat down on the couch where I had sat 1,000 times before, and I pressed the record button hidden in my pocket. You tell me, I said. You were the one who sent Nathan to my apartment. Her face remained perfectly composed, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Lauren, I was worried about you. You've been under so much stress lately, and I thought maybe Nathan could help you with some home repairs. Don't lie to me, I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. I heard you at the restaurant. You told Dad to have Nathan change my locks. Don't let her have time to react. Those were your exact words. So I'm asking you, Mother. What were you trying to access? What were you trying to keep me from finding? She stood up, smoothing her sweater, a gesture I recognized as buying time to calculate her response. Lauren, you're being dramatic. I was concerned about your safety. That building of yours isn't in the best neighborhood. I thought new locks would be sensible. Then why not ask me first? Why do it behind my back? Why hire Thomas Hale to break into my apartment? The color drained from her face. That was when I knew I had her. She hadn't expected me to know about Thomas. She had probably assumed he would just take the money and keep his mouth shut, not realizing that breaking into an apartment with a child's toys visible would trigger a more thorough investigation. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. The police have Thomas in custody, I said, watching her face. He told them everything. About the $5,000 you paid him. About the instructions to make it look like a break-in but not take anything. About the envelope with the message. She sat back down, and for the first time in my life I saw my mother look uncertain. Lauren, she said carefully, there are things you don't understand. Business matters that your father and I have had to handle. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect the family. Protect the family, I repeated. Is that what you call opening credit cards in my name without permission? Using my social security number to hide assets? Forging my signature on documents? That's protection. Those were for your own good, she said, her voice rising. You were drowning in debt. You couldn't manage your own finances. We had to step in. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I had taken of the mysterious bank account statements, the ones with deposits from Reeves Holdings LLC. Explain this then. Explain why there's an account in my name with $18,000 in it that I didn't know existed. Explain where that money came from. She stared at the screen, and I watched her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I could prove. That's a trust fund for Liam's education. From a company called Reeves Holdings. I leaned forward. Mom, I looked up that company. It's registered in Delaware. It owns property in the Bahamas. And according to the incorporation documents I found online, I'm listed as one of the officers. Except I never signed anything. I never agreed to be part of any company. So either you forged my signature again, or you've been using my identity for some business venture I know nothing about. The mask was crumbling now. Her carefully maintained composure was cracking, revealing something desperate underneath. You don't understand what's at stake, she said, her voice tight. If those documents become public, if the wrong people see them, your father could go to prison. We could lose everything. The house, the business, our reputation, everything we've built. You built it on lies, I said. You built it on fraud. And you used my name, my identity to do it. I'm not your accomplice, Mother. I'm your victim. How dare you, she hissed, and there it was. The rage I had always known was lurking beneath the surface. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a place to live when you got yourself pregnant. We helped you with Liam's medical bills. We welcomed you back into this family when you should have been ashamed. And this is how you repay us. By accusing us of crimes, by turning against your own family. You didn't help me, I said, and my voice was shaking, but I kept going. You trapped me. You made sure I was so far in debt that I could never leave. You made me dependent on you so you could control me. And you've been using my identity to hide your illegal activities because you knew nobody would suspect me. I was your perfect cover, wasn't I? The struggling single mother who was too naive and too grateful to ask questions. She stood up abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. You have no proof of any of this. I pulled out a folder that Eva had helped me assemble, copies of bank statements, credit card applications with forged signatures, and corporation documents listing me as an officer of companies I had never heard of. I have all the proof I need. And I gave copies to the police last night. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her face pale, her carefully styled hair suddenly looking like a costume. You wouldn't, she finally said. You wouldn't destroy your own family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt something inside me finally break free from decades of conditioning and guilt and fear. You destroyed this family a long time ago, I said quietly. I'm just refusing to help you hide it anymore. She moved toward me, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to physically stop me from leaving. But she just stood there, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her whole body rigid with fury. If you do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but loaded with venom, you will have nothing. No family, no support, no one to turn to when things inevitably fall apart. You'll be completely alone. I've been alone this whole time, I said. I just didn't realize it. I walked out of that house, out of my childhood home, and I didn't look back. The rain had started to fall harder, soaking through my jacket within seconds, but I stood in the driveway for a moment, letting it wash over me. My phone was ringing already, probably my mother calling to continue the fight, but I didn't answer. I was done answering her calls. I was done explaining myself. I was done trying to make her understand that what she had done was wrong. I drove straight to the police station. Officer Grant met me in the lobby, and I gave him the recording of my conversation with my mother. We sat in an interview room while he listened to it, his expression darkening as he heard my mother's admissions, her justifications, her threats. When it finished, he looked at me with something like respect. "This is damning," he said. "Combined with the physical evidence from the break-in and Thomas Hale's testimony, we have enough to move forward with charges. Are you ready to make an official statement?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready." For the next 3 hours, I gave a complete statement about every incident I could remember, every forged signature, every mysterious account, every warning sign I had dismissed. They photographed my identification documents, took copies of every piece of evidence I had brought. Grant explained that there would be an investigation, that it might take months before any charges were formally filed, that I would probably need to testify. I agreed to everything. When I finally left the police station, it was late afternoon. I picked up Liam from Eva's house, and he asked why I looked so tired. I just told him it had been a long day, that we were going to stay with Aunt Eva for a little while, that everything was going to be okay. He accepted this with the easy trust of a 5-year-old, and I envied that trust, that ability to believe what you're told without questioning the layers of complication underneath. That night after Liam was asleep, I wrote an email to my mother. It was short, just 3 sentences. "The documents have been submitted to the police. Please cease all contact with me. If you need legal representation, I suggest you find it immediately." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. No apologies, no explanations, no room for negotiation. Just a clear boundary, the first real boundary I had ever set with her. Then I blocked her number, blocked my father's number, blocked Nathan's number. Cut the cords that had been strangling me my entire life. Eva made us tea, and we sat in her living room in comfortable silence. Finally, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Free," I said. Terrified and guilty and sad, but underneath all that, free. The next few weeks unfolded in a blur of legal meetings and police interviews and paperwork. The investigation into my family's financial activities expanded as more evidence came to light. It turned out that Reeves Holdings LLC was just the tip of the iceberg. There were multiple shell companies, offshore accounts, in 3 different countries, properties purchased under false names, years of tax evasion carefully hidden behind a network of seemingly legitimate business transactions. And my name was on documents throughout the entire structure, my identity used as a shield to deflect suspicion. The district attorney explained that I was being classified as a victim of identity theft rather than a co-conspirator, but I would need to cooperate fully with the investigation to maintain that status. I agreed immediately. I gave them access to everything, every document I could find, every conversation I could remember. I wanted them to have it all. My mother tried to contact me through various means. She left messages with Eva, she sent letters to my old apartment, she even showed up at my work one day and had to be escorted off the property by security. Each attempt was more desperate than the last, alternating between apologies and threats, between claims that she had done everything out of love and accusations that I was betraying the family. I didn't respond to any of it. There was nothing left to say. Nathan sent me a single text message 2 weeks after that birthday dinner that had changed everything. "You're destroying Mom and Dad. I hope you can live with yourself." I blocked his number without replying. His loyalty had always been clear, and I had no energy to waste trying to convince him that our parents' actions were wrong. Sarah reached out too, but her message was different. "I'm sorry for everything. I saw what they were doing to you, and I should have said something. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't ready. Maybe someday I would be able to forgive her silence, but not yet. The news broke about 2 months after that night. The headlines read, "Local real estate developer under investigation for identity theft and tax fraud, daughter named as victim." It was surreal seeing my family's secrets laid out in black and white, seeing my mother's carefully curated image shattered in the public eye. The article described me as a victim who had cooperated with authorities, but I still felt exposed, vulnerable, like everyone was judging me for not seeing it sooner, for not stopping it. Eva reminded me constantly that I had done nothing wrong, that I was brave for coming forward, that I was breaking a cycle that might have continued for generations. She helped me file for a legal name change, not because I wanted to hide, but because I wanted to reclaim my identity as something that belonged to me alone. Lauren Reeves felt like a costume I had been forced to wear. I wasn't sure yet who I would become, but it would be someone I chose. The criminal charges were filed 4 months later. My mother and father were both indicted on multiple counts of identity theft, tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. Nathan was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, someone who had knowledge of the crimes but whose involvement wasn't substantial enough to warrant charges. The trial was set for the following year. Through it all, I focused on building a life that was actually mine. I found a new apartment in a better neighborhood, a bright 2-bedroom with big windows that let in the afternoon Sunday. Liam loved it immediately, claimed the smaller bedroom as his kingdom, and decorated it with his drawings and toys. I started therapy, working through decades of manipulation and gaslighting, with a psychologist who specialized in family trauma. It was painful work, unpacking all the ways I had been taught to doubt myself, to minimize my needs, to accept unacceptable behavior as normal. I also started building a new support system. Eva had always been there, but I had been so consumed by my family's demands that I had neglected other relationships. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with, joined a single parents support group, started attending events at Liam's school, and actually talking to the other parents instead of rushing off to meet some family. Obligation. One of those parents was a man named Daniel, a single father raising a daughter about Liam's age. We bonded over the chaos of kindergarten pickup and the mysteries of homework assignments, and slowly, carefully, we became friends. He asked me out for coffee one day, and I almost said no out of habit, out of the ingrained belief that I didn't deserve good things. But then I thought about how far I had come, about the woman I was becoming, and I said yes. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was the first time in years that I had allowed myself to be open to the possibility of something good, something uncomplicated, something that wasn't wrapped up in guilt and obligation. We talked about our kids, about our jobs, about our favorite movies. It was refreshingly normal, and normal felt revolutionary. The trial took 3 weeks. I testified on the second day, walking through my relationship with my parents, the financial manipulation, the discovery of forged documents. My mother's lawyer tried to paint me as a willing participant who was only claiming victim status to avoid responsibility, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutors had documented every forged signature, every unauthorized account, every instance where my identity had been used without my consent. Sitting in that courtroom looking at my mother across the aisle was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She looked smaller, somehow diminished, her careful facade stripped away to reveal someone who was just frightened and cornered. For a moment I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the old impulse to protect her, to make this easier. But then I thought about Liam, about the kind of person I wanted him to become, about the lessons I wanted to teach him about boundaries and self-respect. And I held firm. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back with guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt a complicated mix of relief and grief. Relief that the truth had been acknowledged, that my version of events had been validated. Grief for the family I had wanted to have, for the mother I had needed but never got, for the years I had spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. My mother was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. My father got 6 years because of his role in creating the shell companies and offshore structures. Nathan avoided prison time but was banned from working in real estate and placed on probation. The family business was dissolved, the properties sold to pay restitution and legal fees. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I had said everything I needed to say, and I didn't need to see them led away in handcuffs to feel closure. Instead, I spent that day with Liam at the park, pushing him on the swings and watching him climb the jungle gym with fearless determination. This was my real life now, these ordinary, precious moments with my son, and I wasn't going to miss them anymore. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who taught you that your pain doesn't matter. Sometimes love means protecting yourself even when it means standing alone. And sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about finally believing you deserved better all along. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-protection? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Your voice matters, and your story could help someone else find their way out of the darkness. Thank you for listening.